continue to learn the source of our learning should be for the sake of getting the hostages out immediately and protecting our soldiers and Am Yisrael and the innocents on all sides.
And it doesn't depend on the context, yes.
But what doesn't depend on the context?
Yeah, you heard what they said, the heads of the universities. But
oh. I'm laughing, but this is one of
you are laughing? I think we are back to the 30s of the last century.
I know. I was just going to say I'm laughing, but it's a very serious, very, very serious thing, and I'm sure you saw the coverage about at the UN just in the last day or two about the silence of the UN regarding women, and that finally after 2 months they said something, and I don't know. It's really it's terrible. I mean, the whole thing is crazy, and I've been for the more than a month I keep thinking I want to write something about it because whatever I say is not going to make much difference, but I feel like I should say something on Facebook because I have a number of non-Jewish friends. One of them actually reached out to me shortly after the war broke out to ask how I was doing. And it took me, I don't know, a day or two to respond. And then I tried to explain to them in just a couple of sentences how I feel. And then I didn't hear from them again. Because I think and the reason is I think they don't know how to respond to me. My feeling, I don't want to go into this deeply, but I feel like people that I know personally, this also includes Jewish friends of mine who are not, I don't think, not particularly connected to Israel or not particularly connected to their Judaism. I think they're all torn that on the one hand they're sympathetic to Israel, and on the other hand, in the States there's a huge amount of emphasis on the civilian casualties in Gaza. That's the main story. I read the New York Times, I read the Washington Post. Not too much. I mostly just read their headlines because otherwise it's too depressing. And I want to explain to them how all of us feel. We're not happy about civilian casualties, but it's also, I don't know how, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I think it's a really important issue, but it's not the most important issue to me personally. And that might sound callous, but I just think that if your family was personally attacked and at the same time as, I don't know, as somebody else, of course you'll be worried about everybody, but most of you are going to be worried about your family. It's just a natural response, but I don't know. Anyone who's interested, I have some good podcasts for you to listen to and some good articles to read, but if you want, I'll send links, but otherwise we should do some learning. So let's do the learning.
You have new glasses.
Oh, you noticed?
Yes.
I got them actually a couple of weeks ago. I had them
beyond the pool, the big pool.
My glass, that's a long story, but
okay, let's
I got cheap mail. You can send away for glasses here in the United States. I got cheap glasses and they're very good. Okay. So we're still really in the middle of discussion about the shiur of achila, on Yom Kippur. And we had gone through this part of the sugya. The sugya has gone sort of back and forth. The Mishnah says that if you eat kikotevet hagasa, kamo v'kagarinatab b'yom kippurim, so that's for that you'll be chayav. And we already learned, just to remind ourselves, that if you eat less than that, it's asur to eat anything, but less than that, you would not be chayav a korban chatat if you ate b'shogeg and so forth. But the Gemara here has been trying to determine the size of the kikotevet. So first we had Rav Papa, who asked, is the kikotevet that the Mishnah talks about, is that with its pit or without its pit? And we understood, at least in the initial round, that Rav Ashi, who didn't ask the question about kikotevet, he assumed that it meant with its pit, because it means kikotevet hagasa, the gasa part, indicates as big as a kotevet as can be, right? So what would make it big is the size of the pit inside. And once again, it doesn't, just even according to that, it doesn't mean that if you ate a date and you ate the pit with it, that you would be chayav, because you're not going to be chayav for eating the pit, because it's not ra'ui la'achila. It's not something that you can really count as food. And the kotevet hagasa is a volumetric measure. So it would mean then the size of the kotevet along with its pit. That's the size. Okay, but then we had, I'm going to go over it a little bit from here. So Rabbah said in the name of Rav Yehuda, the kotevet that they said, kotevet hagasa shamru, yitera mikabetza. It's more than a kabetza. The kimlahu l'Rabbanan de b'hachi miyat v'date, batzir mehachi lo miyat v'date. And he includes in his declaration this idea that the significance of the shiur is that this is enough to put your mind at ease on a fast day. When you're fasting, if you eat a kikotevet hagasa, that's what's important and puts your mind at ease, but it's not the normal size of eating that we associate with eating for other isurim. All right, so here it's asur to eat, and it's also asur to eat a whole lot of other things. You're not allowed to eat chametz or soor on Pesach. You're not allowed to eat treif meat. You're not allowed to eat whatever, shkatzim or masim. There are all kinds of things, and that's a separate issue. But in any event, the shiur seems to be determined. The association with kotevet is that this is enough to put your mind at ease. Okay. So the Gemara challenged Rabbah, and it brought the Mishnah in Sukkah. And in the Mishnah in Sukkah, what we learn is that the way the Gemara wants to read the Mishnah tells me that on the one hand, I have Rabban Gamliel, who ate 2 kotavot and drank a dli shamayim in the Sukkah, that he demanded that it be brought into the Sukkah. But there's a braita that explains he wanted to be brought into the Sukkah not because he had to eat that in the Sukkah, but he wanted to be machmir on himself. So from that I learned that if you were to eat 2 kotavot, meaning 2 kotavot without the pits, because you don't eat the pits. Here we're talking about a case where somebody's actually eating the dates. So two kotovot would not be enough to demand that you have to eat it in the sukkah. That's on the one hand. And then the Mishnah also talks about Rabbi Tzadok, who ate less than a kibetza outside of the sukkah. And so what do I learn from all of these things? That if it seems that Rabbi Tzadok purposely ate less than a kibetza outside of the sukkah, because it implies that if it would be a kibetza or more, he would have had to have eaten it in the sukkah. So I understand that eating a kibetza, if you're eating a kibetza, you have to eat on Sukkot. You have to eat it in the sukkah. If you're eating that amount of food, you have to eat it in the sukkah. That I learned from Rabbi Tzadok. And then I learned from Rabban Gamliel that two kotovot together, you don't have to eat inside the sukkah. So it tells me that two kotovot together don't equal one kibetza, right? So we'll pick up from here. Yisal kadata kotevet hagasa shamru yiterami kibetza. If you would think that the kotevet hagasa that the Chachamim talked about is more than a kibetza, Hasht, right, which is Rabba's contention. That's how we started off the sugya. Rabba holds that the kotevet hagasa that they said is more than a kibetza. How can that be? Because two kotovot, granted they're without their pit, but two kotovot together doesn't equal one kibetza. That's what we learned from Rabban Gamliel. Kotevet hagasa garinatam ihavi yitera mikabetza. So how could it be that if you have one kotevet along with its pit, that it's more than a kibetza? In order for that to happen, it would mean that the pit has to be at least a little bit more than the fruit itself, than the actual meat of the fruit that you're eating. So Rabbi Yirmi says, yes, that's the case. Two kotovot without their pit is not like a kibetza, is not the amount of a kibetza, but kotevet hagasa v'kariyanta havi yitera mikabetza. But one fat date along with its pits would equal more than a kibetza. So how would that work? This is what people say. This is like a folk saying that if you have trei kabe de tamre, chad kabe de kshita v'sariach, if you have two kav of dates, two measures of dates, then one kav will chad kava de kshita v'sariach. One kav will be the pit and the extra stuff that's like inside the pit, between the pit and the date. So, yeah, by the way, I did not look into this, but you know, the dates that we eat that we know that we grow in Israel, they wouldn't really fit this description. But apparently, there were dates that where this is true, where the size of the pit, right? It's not the weight of the pit; it's the size of the pit, along with like the connecting tissue that's inside of the date, is actually a little bit more than the amount of date that you get. So I don't know enough about dates to tell you what kind of date that is, but that was apparently something. That was something that at least they must have had in Babel. Must have had that in Babylonia. That's all I could say. Rava Amar. So according to that, so what's the point of Rabbi Yirmiyah? He's trying to say that actually that is the case. That is that the kotevet along with the pit is more than a kibetza. So he's upholding Rabba's contention that the kotevet hagasa that Chachamim talked about was more than a kibetza. So it doesn't have to be a lot more, it could just be a little bit more. But that's the relationship. But Rava says actually the whole thing, this whole discussion is not a proof. Because Hatam Hainu Tama Mishum Havale Pire, Upiri Lo Bao Sukkah. He says the reason that Rabban Gamliel was being machmir on him, or I should put it this way, Rabban Gamliel's chumrah of eating the kotovot inside of the sukkah wasn't connected to the shiur of what he was eating. He was being machmir because he was eating fruit. And fruit you don't need to eat in a sukkah. The implication is no matter how much fruit you're eating, you don't have to eat it in the sukkah. So if that's true, I don't really learn anything from Rabban Gamliel and how much he ate inside the sukkah, or that he didn't have to. I wanted to prove from the fact that he ate 2 kotavot b'chumrah inside of the sukkah that's less than a shiur. But if he had more than that, he would have had to. But that's.
But they speak about the dates only as a measure, a measure, a volumetric measure, not. But so food he's eating is not are not the dates themselves.
No, but that was exactly that was part of the Gemara's original contention, though. He's eating 2 kotavot without their pits, and he, as a chumrah, he ate them inside of the sukkah. So what would that imply to you? That the volume of 2 pitted dates, the volume of 2 dates without their pits, must be less than a kibetza. The emphasis is only the reason the Maaseh Rabban Gamliel is helpful is because he's eating kotovot. He's eating actual kotovot. And in the Gemara's assumption, it's like our assumption. The Gemara's assumption is, okay, what would the volume of 2 pitted dates be? So the Gemara's assumption is that the pit is less than half of the volume of the date, and he took out the pits, or his servants probably took out the pits. And so I would understand that 2 kotavot together, if 2 kotavot together don't equal a kibetza, how can 1 kotevet with its pit equal a kibetza? Because I would assume that the 1 kotevet plus another kotevet would be more than the kotevet with its pit, than 1 kotevet with its pit. But then we have Rabbi Yirmiyah, and Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no, actually that's not the case. That the pit itself is actually a little bit more than the size of the date. Yeah, so that's why I say I don't know what species of date he's talking about, but we have to imagine that was the kind of date that Rabbi Yirmiyah meant. And he says, that Hayinu Da'amri Inshi, Rav Papa says that this is what people talk about. That, in other words, what's the point of Rav Papa, and what's the point of this folk saying that if you have 2 kav of dates, then you have a little more than a kav of just the pit and the excess. You could imagine that would be used in different scenarios, but it's just to say that people were used to the idea. Let's say if you went to the shuk and you bought, a kilo of dates, then you knew that you were getting less than half a kilo of actual fruit. Something like it's like a rule of thumb. People knew that. Okay, so, but But Rava says the whole thing doesn't matter because the only reason Rabban Gamliel was being machmir. Again, I'm tripping up on my own language. The point of Rabban Gamliel eating his kotavot, his dates inside of the sukkah, the point of his chumrah was that he was eating fruit, and he could have eaten more than that amount outside of the sukkah. His chumrah wasn't that we thought that the chumrah was that he was eating less than a shiur out, which he could have eaten outside of the sukkah, but he said, let's eat it in the sukkah. But the real chumrah was that he was eating fruit, and if that's all he was eating, right, and his meal was just fruit and was just the dates and water. So he didn't want to eat dates or drink water outside of the sukkah. That's bichala chumrah. That you don't have to eat fruit inside of the sukkah. The implication being now, regarding Hilchot Sukkah, that you could eat as much fruit as you want outside of the sukkah. You can eat as much fruit as you want outside of the sukkah. Whereas Rabbi Tzadok, who was eating less than a kibetza outside of the sukkah, it doesn't say what he was eating, but it seems like he was probably eating bread because it talks about it that he wrapped it up in a cloth before he ate it, and he didn't wash. So we're comparing, I want to say apples to oranges, but we're comparing dates to bread, right? So it's not a relevant comparison. So that's how the sugya ends up at this point. We're concluding for the moment like Rava. Rava says you don't have to eat fruit inside of the sukkah under any circumstances, no matter how much you're eating. So now the Gemara challenges that. Now we're moving on. Meitive. So we ask a kasha on what Rava says. Amar Rebbe, Kshayinu lomdim Torah etzel Rebbe Elazar ben Shemoah heviu lefanenu te'enim v'anavim v'achalnu achilat arai chutz sukkah. So we have a braita that Rebbe says, when we were learning by Rebbe Elazar ben Shemoah, they brought before us figs and grapes, and we ate them in achilat arai outside of the sukkah. So what's an achilat arai? What does that mean?
It's not part of a set meal.
It's not part of a set meal. It's a kind of a snack, right? Literally a temporary meal. So we're going to contrast it with a chilat keva, which would be, like you're saying, would be a set meal, would be a fixed meal of some sort. So what do I learn from Rebbe's story? Rebbe is telling me that we ate fruits and we ate them as an achilat arai outside of the sukkah. So the Gemara's diuk is achilat arai in, achilat keva lo. The fact that Rebbe tells us that they ate their fruits as an achilat arai implies to me that was the heter for them to eat the fruit outside of the sukkah. That is, that they weren't making a formal meal out of eating the fruit. But had they made a formal meal, a set meal, based on eating fruit, then they would have had to have eaten it in the sukkah. So what's the kasha on Rava? Rava just said that the reason that we think that Rabban Gamliel is machmir, the chumrah of Rabban Gamliel was that he demanded to eat his fruit inside the sukkah. But if he wanted to, he could eat as much fruit as he wants outside of the sukkah. So what's the kasha now from the story of Rabbi?
That Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel would need to eat the fruit in the sukkah if it was achilat keva, if it was a formal meal.
Right. So now I could say that Rabban Gamliel, who said, let's eat the kotavot inside the sukkah, it could be now that the chumrah was that he was only eating it as an achilat arai. But any fruit that you would eat as an achilat keva, you would have to eat it in the sukkah.
So the volume is not the criterion. The criterion is the ma'amad of your Sauda, is if it is arai
Or keva.
keva.
Mm-hmm. So then, if that's true, then this takes away. Then that if this kasha is upheld, then it would. Then we would dismantle what Rava said, because Rava said, no, it doesn't matter how much fruit you're eating how much fruit you're eating. You don't have to eat any fruit in the sukkah if that's what you want. And I will say, it's not true. Based on Rebbe, I'll say, if you're being kovea suda on fruit, then you would have to eat it inside the sukkah. So
But this doesn't destroy the argument about the two dates being equal to a beitzah. Even if you don't get this halacha, the fact that you discuss this, you ask yourself if two dates are equal to a beitzah, is still relevant.
Exactly. So in other words, Rava came in response to Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Rabbi Yirmiyah was the one who said that actually I can still uphold this idea that a kotevet hagasa is more than a kabetza, because of the whole argument that we brought for him, that the two kotevet without the pit is actually less than a kabetza, but one kotevet with a garin is more than a kabetza. And Rava said, I don't have to draw that conclusion, because I could just say the whole reason that for the chumrah of Rabban Gamliel is, or the reason that he's being machmir on himself is because he's eating fruit, and fruit he didn't have to eat at all in the sukkah. So now I have the Baita of Rebbe, which implies that actually, no, that if he was going to be kovea suda, then he had to eat it inside the sukkah. And so if I want to integrate Rebbe now backwards, I would say that the chumrah of Rabban Gamliel was that he was eating an achilat arai with his fruits, and the chumrah was that he demanded to eat it in the sukkah anyway, even though it was an achilat arai. So Gemara says no. They're answering for Rava. They say, Ema achalnum ki achilat arai chutz sukkah. I'll say, in other words, I'm going to modify a little bit how we read this Braita with Rebbe. And what did he say? Achalnum achilat arai chutz sukkah. We ate them in this kind of snack meal outside of the sukkah, and the diuk is not going to be that if it was an achilat keva that I would have had to eat it inside the sukkah. Ela ema, I'll say we ate them like an achilat arai outside of the sukkah. What do we get from that? How does that help if I say it's ki achilat arai? Not that they are actually eating an achilat arai, but we eat them like an achilat arai. It's a slight modification in understanding Rebbe. So how does that help us? Or how does it help Rava? Not sure. Okay. So when we first learned the Braita with Rebbe, the Gemara makes this diuk that they ate achilat arai utzasuka. So arai then comes to exclude achilat keva. If I say ki achilat arai utzasuka, what does it mean? That whatever they were eating was just like a snack. And I'm not going to be. I can't conclude from that if they were eating at achilat keva, they would have to eat in the sukkah. In other words, in our straight reading, in the first reading of Rebbe, I understand achilat arai is a specific halachic category. It's a specific halachic category that contrasts with achilat keva. But if I say that we were eating, all he means is that we were eating it like a snack. We're eating it not like an achilat keva, michutz sukkah, but it doesn't really tell me anything halachic. It's just describing how they were eating. I made a little note here. This is based on a Mishnah. Oh yeah, okay. So this is based on the Mishnah in Sukkah. You can take a look at that for a second, which I think. Oh, I remember now. I closed it earlier. Just a second. I'll bring it up. Share the screen. Okay, so this is Mishnah Sukkah, Perek Bet, Mishnah Dalet. Oses Sukkato ben ha'ilanot, va'ilanot tefanot la, kshera. Okay, so it's about building the sukkah. We won't discuss that. Shulchay mitzvah, pturin min sukkah. Another issue that we're not going to get into. Cholin and mishamshehen pturin min sukkah. People who are sick and people who tend to them are patur from the sukkah. And then, along with, in this same vein, the Mishnah says, "Ochin v'shotin arai chutz sukkah." You're allowed to eat and drink in a temporary fashion outside of the sukkah. So that's the basis for our understanding with what Rabbi, in the whole sugya. Actually, we have this idea that if you're eating achilat arai, you don't have to eat it inside the sukkah, and along with that understanding, if I learn the Mishnah stam the way it, as it appears, it would seem that it doesn't matter what you're eating. In other words, it doesn't say you can eat fruit outside of the sukkah or something like that. It just says achilat arai. So the Rambam here says achilat arai hu shiochal kamut muetet v'lo yitkon bo v'lo yitkaven bo shihei suda. So Rambam explains the Mishnah like this. He says this is talking about if you're eating a small amount and you don't have the intention of making it into a suda. You're only eating it to quell your hunger until a time when you can finish eating it in a more fulsome way later. Right, and then the Rambam is going here. The next Mishnah is the Maasev of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Gamliel. It's the Maaseh that we saw in the Gemara earlier. Maaseh ve'ivil Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai litamat tashil Rabbi Gamliel, etc. So the Rambam says on that, ve'ivim Maaseh ze lahashmiyacha shekol harotzeh lachmir shelo yochal klum v'lo yishteh chutz l'sukkah harei ze meshubach af al pi she'eno chayav. So the reason that the Mishnah brings the Mishnah of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabban Gamliel eating their whatever they ate inside of the sukkah, or even just tasting the tafshil inside of sukkah, is just to tell you that even though this is a chumrah, and how do I know that it's a chumrah? How do I know that it's a chumrah that they ate and that they ate their things in the inside of the sukkah? I know it because of this, of the mission that this line in the Mishnah just before the Maaseh. In other words, when I'm learning the Mishnah, it sounds like this story with Rabban Gamliel contradicts what the Mishnah just said. The Mishnah said that you can eat and drink. Ochlim v'shotin means l'chatchila. You're allowed to eat and drink b'tzura ara'it outside of the sukkah. And then I have this story that says that this is what they did. They brought the tavshil, they brought their kotavot and so forth inside of the sukkah. So why? Because neither of them are eating a meal. So the Rambam is saying that that's brought to tell you that not that you have to do what Rabbi Gamliel did, but rather just tells you that that's a chumrah, that's meshubach, right? In other words, it's a worthy thing to do. It's a worthy thing to do, to eat and drink every single thing you're going to eat or drink on Sukkot, that you should really eat or drink it inside of the Sukkah. Okay. So then I have the bright, let's go back to the Gemara. So then I have the bright of Rebbe, who talks about, when you're learning with Rabbi Eliezer ben Shemoah, that they brought fruit for us to eat, and we ate them achilat arayit chutz sukkah. So that implies that even fruit you would have to eat, if you're eating it as an achilat keva, you have to eat it in the sukkah. So the Gemara gives a couple of answers, and the first answer is actually all we really learn is that they ate it like an achilat arayit, but had they it doesn't really tell me anything about whether or not an actual achilat arayit, whether or not eating fruit is actually an achilat arayit, as opposed to achilat keva.
I think I understand that's the difference between what you're eating and the manner of what you're eating.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, thank you. So then the Gemara says, if you want, I'll give you a different way of reconciling Rebbe with Rava. And that's this. Achalnu machilat keva, v'achalnu pat achilat arai, v'hadayu chutz sukkah. What does it mean when he says we ate these dates and grapes as an achilat arai? It's as if it was missing something, because once you talk about achilat arai, you technically you're contrasting that with achilat keva. And according to the second answer, the only thing that's really koveya is going to be if you're eating pat, if you're eating bread. So means they brought us this fruit to eat, and we ate that with bread as an achilat arai. We ate it with bread as an achilat arai outside of the sukkah. So what would be the significance there? As we'll see a little bit more in a second, that and we've discussed this before, and if you've learned brachot, then you understand that if you're eating bread as an adjunct to something else, and the main thing that you're eating isn't the bread, you're really eating something else. In this case, they were eating fruit. So they had a little bit of bread with their fruit, so they weren't kovea suda on the bread. The bread became tafel, became secondary to eating the fruit. And that's all that Rebbe is saying. And so it tells me that it tells me that what was the arai part, that the bread was the arai part, and that fruit, it's not, the implication is it's not shayach to discuss fruit as being keva or arai. In which case, I go back to Rava's contention that you can eat as much fruit as you want outside of the sukkah. So in this, the Gemara says, Lema Masayele. Let's bring a braita to support this pshat that we're saying now. The braita says, Afikach im hishlim b'minei targima yatsa. Actually, I'm sorry. This is I should have marked this. Just a second. It's actually a Mishnah, which is just the Hemshech in Masechet Sukkah. Okay, so we're learning a little bit of Sukkah. So in Sukkah, this is what we did. We said, Ochin v'shotin arai chutz Sukkah, right? Then we have the story that the Gemara brought of the Maaseh with Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Tzadok, and how they ate or didn't eat inside the sukkah. And then I get to machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim about how much you have to eat in the sukkah during sukkah. So Rabbi Eliezer omer 14 sudot chayav adam lachol b'sukkah. Rabbi Eliezer says you have to eat in the course of Sukkot, which is a 7-day holiday. You have to eat 14 actual su'udot inside of the sukkah. Achat bayom, achat balayah. Every day you have to have 2 su'udot, one in the morning and one at night. Or technically you'll start from the night, right? You have to start from the first night, but every day you have to have 2 su'udot. There's no fixed amount of times that you have to eat in the sukkah, except for the first night. Okay, and that's the way we hold, and everybody knows this. And then the Mishnah goes on to talk about that a little bit more. So, but what do we get from that? According to Rabbi Eliezer, you always have to have these sudot, and according to the Chachamim, you don't. So, sorry, 1 second. So there's a braita that goes along with this Mishnah, and this is the braita that the Gemara brings here. The braita says this would be a nispach to what Rabbi Eliezer says. Rabbi Eliezer says you have to have 14 su'udot. And so if you kach im hishlim b'minei targima yatsa. Therefore, if you fill out the number of su'udot, these su'udot that you have to eat in the sukkah, if you fill them out with types of targima is, the Gemara is going to define targima in a minute, but are you familiar with this term, minei targima? There's actually, targima, as we'll see, targima means, Rashi's going to explain, it means liftan. And liftan in the Talmud just means Chaster translates it as relish. The idea of liftan is something that you eat with bread. So it could be peanut butter. It could be, it could be hummus, right? It could be anything that you would eat along with bread. They had a whole array of things and in certain contexts in the Gemara, it seems that it means some kind of compote. But the idea is that generally speaking, minei targima is whatever you might eat with along with bread. So im hishlim b'minei targima yatsa, if you fill out the sudot with different kinds of targima, then you're yotzei. In other words, you'll be yotzei your 14 sudot. V'yisal kadatach piri ba'u sukkah v'itnei peirot. So if you would think that you have to eat fruit in the sukkah, then why didn't I say that you can fill out your sudot with peirot? So Michael, you're nodding. So what does it mean? You want to say that back in your own words?
Yeah, if he should have said it in place of targima, he should have said perot. So that's because perot has the significance of a sudah, and therefore would require the sukkah.
Right. In other words, if perot is something that you have to eat inside of the sukkah, then it could have said that you can be mashlim with minei perot. It says minei targima. So, but it could have learned perot. So Gemara says, no, my minei targima, perot. I could just say that targima means perot, right? Because targima is a kind of a loose term. It's kind of a catch-all term. So maybe targima means that targima means fruits. In which case, we go back to the idea that if you're being kovea suda on your fruit, then you have to eat it in the sukkah. Or else you could say this is a place where there's not a lot of fruit, and then minei targima would have to mean something other than fruit. Rav Zvi Amar, Kotevet Hagasa Shamru Chasera Mikabetza. So now, up until now, so what have we done? We started off with Rabbah. We're going to come back to this little bit, but I think not today. I want to finish reading this part of the sugya, and then we'll discuss it in greater depth next week. So what do we see? It will go just to summarize. So we started off with Rabbah, and Rabbah said that Kotevet Hagasa. We're still trying to finalize what we think the size of the Kotevet Hagasa is. Rabbah said it's a little more that it's more than a kibetza, and then we had our Shakla V'Tarya about that, and now I'm going to come to Rav Zvid. And he says, Kotevet Hagasa Shamru Chasra Mi Kabetza. He says, not like Rabbah. Rabbah said it's more than a kabetza. Rav Zvid said it's less than a kabetza. And now what's his proof that it's less than a kabetza? Ditnan, because we learn in the Mishnah, Beit Shammai Omrim, this is Mishnah in Psachim. Beit Shammai Omrim So'or B'Kazayit, Chametz B'Kotevet. Beit Shammai says that So'or on Pesach is B'Kazayit, and Chametz is the size of a Kotevet. So for what purpose does he mean? So Rashi says in Bayire Ubayimatzeh. For the Isser of having So'or and Chametz in your house, Beit Shammai says there are two different shiurim for Su'or and Chametz. Su'or, if you have even a kazayit of su'or, then you're over on Ba'ira Ba'imatze. And if you have it, but for chametz, you need a kotevet to be chayav Ba'ira Ba'imatze. So then there's a discussion about this. In the Gemara, my tama to Beit Shammai. So what's the reason for Beit Shammai? In other words, how does Beit Shammai know that you need a kotevet for chametz and a kazayit for zohar to be? How does he know these shiurim? My time to Beit Shammai. What's the reason for Beit Shammai? Nichtov rachmana chametz. Because it could have gone like this. The Torah could have said, so the Torah says, Lo so it singles out both chametz and soar. So the Gemara theorizes as follows. The Torah could have just said, you can't have any chametz in your house on Pesach. And doesn't have to mention su'or at all. And then I would learn it out as follows. Ana amina, I would say, Uma chametz she'en chimutzo kashe, asur b'kazayit. Su'or she'chimutzo kashe, lo kol shekein. In other words, if the Torah is telling me there's an isur to have chametz on Pesach, chametz is what you eat, right? And su'or is like the sourdough starter. It's not something you actually eat. So the chimutz of chametz, the fermented aspect of chametz is kal. It's not a heavy chimutz because you can still eat it. But if something is so chamutz that you can't eat it, like su'or, I would say that's a kol shekain. In other words, if chametz she'en chimutzo kasher, you're not allowed to have in your house in the size of a kazayit. And how do I know the size of kazayit? Because, as we said earlier, star machila in the Torah is kazayit. And what am I worried about with chametz? I'm worried that you're going to eat it. So if chametz she'en chimutzo kasher asur pikazayit, su'or shechimutzo kasher lo kol shekain, wouldn't it all the more so be true that I'm not allowed to have su'or? Mi depalginhu rachmana limdalach shiuro shel zeh lo kashiru shiuro shel zeh. Su'or b'kazayit, the chametz b'kekotevet. In other words, our question was, Beit Shammai makes this declaration that when the Torah says, Lo yireh lecha chametz, lo yireh su'or b'chol gevulecha, that there are different shiurim for how much chametz and how much su'or in your house will be enough to be over on this isur. So what's his reasoning? His reasoning is that the Torah didn't have to tell me su'or. The Torah could have just said, you're not allowed to eat chametz. And I would have known from the kal v'chomer that I'm not allowed to have, that you're not allowed to own chametz. I would know by kal v'chomer that I'm not allowed to own su'or. Because, why? Because su'or is chimutzo kasher. What's the significance of chimutzo kasher? I'm not going to eat it. What does it matter that chimutzo kasher? Why would I think it's a kol shekain? If you understand my question. What do you do with su'or? I'll put it that way. What does one do with su'or?
Well, you use it to make food, but you still have it in the house. It's still something you have. You don't eat it directly. It's just something you have.
It's something you have. So the kol shekain from chametz, in other words, if the Torah says chametz is asur, why am I going to say that su'or is kol shekain? Because with su'or, I can make a lot of chametz. That would be a kol shekeh. Chametz, let's say maybe the Torah is afraid I'm going to eat it. That's actually a related but separate discussion. It's a Machokas Rashi and Tosos at the very beginning of Psachim about what the reason for Bal Yirai, Bal Yamatzeh is. But okay, just in the context of what we have here, again, so Beit Shammai says that the shiur for chametz is kekotevet, and the shiur for seor is kizayim. How does he know that they have different shiurim? Because his reasoning goes like this: the Torah could have just said, "You're not allowed to have chametz," and then I would have known by kol shekain that I'm not allowed to have seor. And if that would be the case, then I would say that they have the same shiur, because I don't have any evidence to say that I would need more or less seor. I would just assume that if the isur is not owning chametz, would mean chametz and anything that can make chametz. So what would that be? That would be seor. So that would be kol shekain. If I'm not allowed to have the chametz, certainly I'm not allowed to have something that's going to make chametz. We could argue about that, but that seems to be the direction of the Gemara. So mid balgin hu rachmana, since the Torah divided them, in other words, it singled out chametz here and seor here, it's to teach you that the shiur of one is not the same as the shiur of the other. So therefore, I'll assign the kazai to the seor and the kotevet to the chametz. Now, at this point, we could ask ourselves, so why dafka would I say the kazai to the seor and the kotevet to the chametz? We'll come back to that. The Gemara, what does the Gemara want to learn out from this for our discussion? We're concerned about Rav Zvid. Rav Zvid says that the Kotevet HaGasad that the Chachamim said, that's less than a Kebetza. And we want to know, we want to try to prove from this Mishnah of Beit Shammai to support him. Okay. So Gemara says, V'yisal kadatach Kotevet HaGasad she'amru yiteirami Kebetza. So if you were to think that the Kotevet HaGasad that we're talking about, Megabe Yom Kippur, is more than a Kebetza, Michte Beit Shammai Ashiura Denafish Mikazait Kamahadre Litne Kebetza. In that Beit Shammai, Ashiura Denafish Mikazait is Kamahadri, that he's Choser, like he's going back to talk about a shiur that's bigger than a kazayit, then let him say a kebetza. In other words, this gets, I'll just go back and remind us, this goes back a little bit to what we were talking about last week, about what is the source actually for shiurim and how they get assigned to different things. So here with the Gemara is alluding to this problem. The Gemara wants to tell us that, Gemara said a second ago, that how does Beit Shammai know that they're different, that there's a differential between the shiur of chametz and seor for Bal Yireh, Bal Yamatzeh? So he learns it out because the Torah singled them out and said expressly chametz and seor. So he has to assign different shiurim to them. And we see that he wants to assign a larger shiur to the chametz than to the seor. So the question is, so the Gemara wants to know why would he assign kotevet when he could have assigned kebetza? In other words, kebetza is a shiur that we see in many, many places. Kotevet, actually, the only other place we see it is Yom Kippur. So would make him assign the shiur of kotevet instead of a kibetza? Litnei kibetza. Let him just say kibetza, that chametz, that seor is gezayit, and chametz is kibetza, and then I would know. I would know that the chametz is a bigger shiur. Well, the inami ki hadadi nitu nitnei kibetza. Or even if you'll say that kibetza and kikotevet hagasa are the same shiur, nitnei kibetza, he could still say kibetza, because again, that's the more common shiur. Ela lav shma mina kotevet pchuta mikibetza. So it tells you the kotevet must be less than a kibetza. So at the minimum that we can say is that the kotevet is not the same shiur as the kibetza. In other words, if it was the same, he would have said kibetza, because that's the more common shiur. And if he was in that he was looking for a shiur that was larger than a kazayit, why didn't he say kibetza? So it must be that the kotevet is neither kazayit nor a kibetza, and at this moment we're saying that the assumption is that that must mean that the kotevet is a little bit less than a kibetza, because he's looking for a shiur that's not quite a kibetza. Again, we haven't explained it fully, but why we would say it's a little bit less and not a little bit more. But let's go on. And Gemara says, Mimai, why would you say that? Dilma lo amemalach kotevet hagasa shamru yiterami kabetza. Right? So that's the Gemara's first question. Why don't I just say, in other words, granted that the kotevet hagasa will not equal a kabetza, but why don't I just say that it's a little bit more? Kotevet hagasa shamru yiterami kabetza hastama kabetza. Inami ki hadadinin v'chadin minayu nakat. So the Gemara says, if I have no other information, I would say I could just say kabetza, the inami, or else I could say ki hadadi ninhu. I could say that they're the same shiur, the kotevet and the kabetza. V'chad minayu nakat. In other words, I haven't answered the question, right? I'm just saying that it's not clear at this point why it should be that Beit Shammai assigned that, first of all, that he used the shiur of kotevet agasa, which is an odd shiur. In other words, and again, this is the whole point of this entire sugya, trying to figure out what a kotevet is in terms of its volume. So at this point, it's not entirely clear. I'm going to end it here. As you see, I left a number of things hanging. So I want to go back next week and try to clarify them more. I'm trying to keep the sugya, broadly speaking, in our heads. So we have, in the beginning, we have Rabbah who says that the kotevet hagasa is more than a kabetza. Now I have Rav Zvid who says it's less than a kabetza. So we'll go through the previous discussion a little bit more, and we'll go through Rav Zvid's the proofs that the Gemara brings for Rav Zvid a little bit more And we have like a cliffhanger here. We'll continue this next time. But I think that's enough to take in for now. And yeah. Okay, everybody, take care.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. And
Bye-bye.
thank you, Paul.
Hanukkah Sameach
Hanukkah Sameach. Yeah, yeah.
That's right.
tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but we'll meet during Hanukkah. Bezrat Hashem.
Ah,
Paul, if you
You-
do you have anything next Wednesday? Or you're not sure.
I don't know.
All right, if you'll let me know. Okay,
Mhm.
but I'm assuming that we'll meet. So have a happy Hanukkah.
Bye-bye.
As happy as you can.
As you can, yes.
Yeah. Kol tov.